Hey guys, tonight we're diving headfirst, maybe literally, into the slippery, steaming, not-so-relaxing world of Roman public baths. Picture this: you're standing at the edge of a grand marble building. The air is thick with a fog of heat, and something else, an aroma best described as old gym sock meets warm olive oil. You haven't even stepped inside yet, and already you're sweating through your toga. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward into the Thermae, the massive Roman bath complex that feels more like a chaotic social experiment than a hygiene haven. The walls are lined with mosaics, some beautiful, some slightly obscene, and the sound of splashing laughter and the occasional argument echoes through the domed ceilings. The steam hits your face instantly, damp and cloying. It clings to your skin, your clothes, even your lungs. It smells lived in. You step aside as a man brushes past, dripping wet, humming a tune as he slaps his bare feet along the slick tile floor. Roman bathhouses were architectural marvels, no doubt. The baths of Caracalla alone could hold over 600 bathers at once. Giant hypocaust systems under the floor kept everything toasty, and slaves worked tirelessly behind the scenes to stoke the fires. But all that brilliance couldn't quite overcome one issue: they were too public, too crowded, too human. You're not just here to wash. Oh no. This is a full sensory experience. Business meetings happen in the corners. Philosophers argue by the fountains. Kids run wild near the frigidarium, pelting each other with olive pits. And somewhere behind a pillar, two people are very obviously not here to bathe. It's a bustling cross-section of society: senators, merchants, gladiators, enslaved servants, all sweating shoulder to shoulder. If you're shy, tough luck. The Romans had a famously loose attitude toward nudity, so there's very little between you and the full spectrum of ancient body types. You find a bench, or rather part of a bench, that's not already glistening with someone else's sweat. A man beside you sneezes directly into the steam. Another nearby is eating what looks like a fish pastry while sitting in nothing but sandals. For a moment you wonder if this is all just a nightmare. A humid, slippery nightmare. Historians still argue whether the Romans genuinely felt clean after all this, or if it was more ritual than sanitation. There's even debate about how often most Romans actually bathed daily for the elites, maybe weekly for the working class. Either way, once you've entered the Thermae, you're committed to the full routine. And don't be fooled by the opulence of the structure. Beneath the marble facade lies a constant churn of reused water, questionable hygiene. And if you're unlucky, a sudden bar of slippery stone that sends you sprawling in front of a dozen strangers. Oh, and shoes, forget about it. You left your sandals at the entrance and the floor is textured. Is that crushed herbs or something worse? You try not to look too closely. The quirkier bits are the etiquette rules. Want to bring your own oil flask and strigil? Totally fine. Want to debate Cicero's latest speech while naked and elbow deep in lukewarm water? Encouraged. Want to make prolonged eye contact with someone while exfoliating your armpits? Somehow also okay. You're in Rome now, baby. And then there's the sound, constant overlapping layers of chatter, clapping, dripping, coughing, splashing, snoring, even lute music from a busker in the changing room. You've heard of white noise machines to help you sleep. This is brown noise. Very brown. Even emperors came here. Marcus Aurelius himself might have bathed just steps away from where you're awkwardly trying not to slip. Yet they weren't immune to the mess. Rumor had it that Emperor Commodus enjoyed strangling people during bath debates. Not exactly a 5-star spa review. You spot a fresco of Neptune riding seahorses. It's chipped and faintly moldy around the edges. A fitting metaphor maybe for how grandeur and grime coexisted in these marble steam palaces. And you, dear listener, are right in the middle of it. You shuffle forward, slipping just slightly as you enter the next chamber and instantly feel the shift, not in temperature, but in eyes. Everyone is looking, not maliciously, but with the casual, blank-faced scrutiny of people who have nothing better to do while half naked. You're not here alone, not in any sense. Welcome to the most communal of communal affairs, Roman bathing, where modesty checks in its dignity at the apoditerium, the changing room, and never comes back out. Your clothes, such as they are, were handed off to a lowly slave, hopefully one who isn't known for selling tunics on the side. Theft in bathhouses was rampant, so much so that curse tablets have been found at ancient sites calling down divine vengeance on whoever took someone's sandals. You glance toward your pile of clothes with mild panic, and then quickly back to your surroundings, better to not appear weak in the eye of the public. You're standing in the tepidarium, the warm room. This is the social core of the thermae, where people don't so much clean themselves as linger in a state of oiled contemplation. Your skin prickles as you adjust to the warmth. You're surrounded by a human tapestry, fat senators lounging like sea lions, wiry merchants, gesturing over ledgers, and somewhere in the corner, a poet trying to seduce a bored widow with terrible meter. Here's where things get weirdly democratic. Everyone's equal, at least in theory. The man next to you might be a consul, or he might be the guy who sharpens consular sandals. Status becomes blurry when everyone's covered in sweat and olive oil. Romans had strict class divisions in most places, but in the baths, it all melts sometimes literally into a steamy social soup. Still, that doesn't mean there aren't unspoken rules. You don't shout. You don't splash. You definitely don't mock someone's body unless you're ready to get a strigil thrown at your face. And yet the line between socializing and scandal was thinner than the togas people left at the door. Historians still argue whether this setting promoted genuine civic unity or simply offered elites another stage to flex on everyone else. Were bathhouses the great equalizer, or just another way for the rich to parade their perfumed slaves and imported oils? No consensus, just a lot of sweaty scholarship. And then there's the elephant in the room, or rather the naked old man who's been talking politics non-stop for 20 minutes. You nod politely, not that you're following his argument about tax grain shipments from Egypt. You're too distracted by the smell wafting from his armpit, somewhere between garlic and a wet dog in a clay pot. You settle into a corner bench. It's warm. Suspiciously warm. Possibly recently vacated. The stone is smooth under your skin, but the air is anything but still. A man walks by, trailing a cloud of something floral and pungent. Perfume medicine rat repellent. You decide not to ask. Overhead, the domed ceiling echoes with the soft hum of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter, a sneeze, or the unmistakable sound of someone slipping in the next room. You flinch in sympathy. To your left, a couple of young men are practicing poetry. Badly. One of them recites a line about nymphs bathing in golden light, and his friend snorts so hard he chokes. It's oddly comforting. No matter the century, there will always be guys trying to impress each other with bad poetry in public bathrooms. The quirky part: bathhouses weren't just for bathing. They were libraries, gyms, restaurants, even brothels sometimes all at once. You might stop to read Virgil while getting a massage. You could order snacks. You might lose your sandals, your wallet, or your virginity, depending on the hour and who was on duty. The tension between wholesome public utility and mildly chaotic misbehavior is ever present. It's like a Roman version of a shopping mall food court, except everyone's naked and periodically throwing buckets of water on themselves. You notice an older woman being carried in on a litter, flanked by 3 young attendants and a parrot in a cage. She looks regal, serene, and entirely unimpressed. You try to copy her expression. It doesn't help. Some days the baths were gender segregated. Other times, depending on the emperor's mood or the moral panic of the week, men and women bathed together with predictably scandalous results. But more on that later. For now, you sit in the haze of body heat and social rituals, trying to remember what actual clean feels like. The oil on your skin glistens. Your nose has adjusted to the potpourri of salt sweat and ancient cologne. You lean back, trying to find a dry spot on the stone behind you. You fail. You close your eyes and listen to the thrum of voices, the distant splash of the frigidarium, the clink of bronze oil flasks being passed around like party favors. And then, just as you're starting to find a sliver of peace, someone sits down right next to you. Very close, very naked, very sweaty. Welcome to the Roman spa experience. No privacy, no personal space. Just you, a few dozen strangers, and all the body heat you never asked for. You feel a tickle of panic as you glance around, realizing that you may need to relieve yourself. And this is where the Roman dream gets even stranger. You shuffle awkwardly toward a side corridor, past a faded fresco of Venus looking coy, and spot the latrine, the public toilet room. It's open, no doors, just a long, cold marble bench with a dozen oval holes. And in front of those, a small trough of running water, and sitting in it, drumroll a sponge on a stick. You freeze. You've heard about this. The tersorium. It's communal. Not like take turns politely communal. No. This is dip it in vinegar and hope for the best communal. You stand there for a moment, debating whether the bladder can hold out just a little longer. Meanwhile, a man to your left uses the sponge with casual ease, gives it a quick swish in the trough, and then returns it to the wall rack. For the next person. Maybe for you. Historians still argue whether the vinegar rinse was actually enough to sterilize it, or if the tersorium was the cause of half the intestinal infections in the empire. Either way, it's the only option, unless you brought your own sponge, which frankly feels like a power move. You tiptoe out, dignity intact, but bladder increasingly concerned, and return to the main bath corridor, where yet another minor humiliation awaits. You're about to get scraped. Before bathing, you must oil yourself. That's the rule. A slave or attendant, usually a balneater, pours warm olive oil onto your skin, rubbing it in with practiced hands. The oil supposedly loosens dirt and opens the pores. Sounds luxurious, right? Except now comes the part where he pulls out a strigil, a curved bronze blade, and starts scraping the oil, sweat, dead skin, and who knows what off your body like he's cleaning a fish, It doesn't hurt exactly, unless he's in a bad mood, or drunk, or both. The Romans believed this process, striduling, was essential for health. They even bottled the oily scrapings called gladiator oil and sold them as muscle-enhancing potions. Yes, people paid money for used body oil from gladiators. That gym locker room smell, that was a feature, not a bug. A man next to you groans softly as he's being scraped, which is somehow more unsettling than screaming. You glance down at the sludge collecting in the tray. It looks like something you'd find behind a refrigerator. You pretend not to see it. The slave scraping you starts humming. It's tuneless, slightly off-key, and oddly calming. You try to relax. After all, this is supposed to be rejuvenating. You remind yourself that Julius Caesar once had this exact treatment. So did Hadrian. So did countless emperors, poets, generals, and senators, most of them probably trying not to flinch, just like you. And yet Romans thought this was peak wellness. Forget eucalyptus towels and cucumber slices. Here health came with a side of friction and possible tetanus. You take a moment to glance at the stridule itself. Simple, effective, and impossible to sanitize. Most were communal, and while some people brought their own, most just shrugged and shared. You'd think the elite might avoid such close contact, but surprisingly, they leaned into it. Baths were their version of networking gossip hubs and Instagram stories all rolled into one. Historians still debate whether the Romans understood the health risks they were courting or simply didn't care. Medical texts from Galen and others recommend the bath ritual as a daily tonic, yet at the same time warn that excessive exposure to steam and scrapes might cause melancholia or weakness of spirit, which feels like ancient speak, for this will exhaust your soul. Once the scraping ends, you stand glistening in leftover oil and confusion. The slave nods, gives you a cloth threadbare and suspiciously damp, and gestures you toward the next room. You sigh. The nightmare isn't over yet. Just past the steamy archway lies the caldarium, the hottest room in the bathhouse. Think of it as a Roman sauna, but wetter. You step in, and your breath catches instantly. The heat is a wall. The air feels like it's been boiled in a clay pot and hurled at your lungs. You blink through the steam and make out shapes, shadowy figures lounging by the pool, some neck deep in the hot water, others sprawled out on marble slabs like sunbathing statues. It's beautiful in a strange way. Firelight flickers behind bronze grates. Water drips rhythmically from the ceiling, but it's also unbearably hot. You shuffle forward trying to find a spot where the tile isn't burning your feet. A man nearby fans himself with a palm frond looking smug. And the danger, it's real. There are stories of people fainting here, of bathhouses catching fire, of elderly men keeling over mid-conversation. One poet even wrote about death in the steam, which sounds poetic, until you remember it might have been his uncle. You lower yourself into the hot water. It feels like being slow-boiled. Somewhere between discomfort and pain, your muscles begin to relax, which is confusing. Maybe the Romans were onto something. Or maybe your body has simply given up. You close your eyes, breathing through your mouth, trying not to think about the tersorium from earlier, or the man now doing leg stretches uncomfortably close to your face. This, you remind yourself, is supposed to be the pinnacle of civilization. You finally peel yourself out of the caldarium skin-tingling hair, plastered to your face and legs like noodles. You've barely survived the Roman version of a hot tub, if the tub was fed by a roaring furnace and possibly designed by someone who hated lungs. You stagger through a narrow archway and enter the frigidarium, the cold room. And when I say cold, I mean Roman winter breeze through a marble corridor cold. The kind of chill that feels like punishment after everything you just endured. The plunge pool sits in the center still and black like a waiting mouth. You watch a man leap in with zero hesitation. He disappears with a splash and resurfaces looking smug. You sigh, gather your courage, and jump. The water hits like a slap. Cold enough to steal your breath. Cold enough to question your entire life. You flail slightly, grace is gone, and resurface with a gasp. The surrounding men nod at you like veterans welcoming a new recruit. One even mutters something in Latin that you suspect means rookie. Historians still argue whether this sudden plunge had genuine health benefits or was just a rite of passage in the bathhouse circuit. Galen swore by it. Others blamed it for joint pain, heart palpitations, and existential despair. You're inclined to agree with both camps. You climb out, shivering, and stumble to a stone bench only to realize that something feels off. It's not just the cold, it's the water, the quality of it. The truth begins to dawn. These pools are not emptied daily. They are topped off. The water is not filtered unless you count let the dirt settle to the bottom as filtration. And hundreds of people come through here every day, including those with open wounds, flaky skin conditions, or a creative interpretation of personal hygiene. Parasites. Yep, lice common. Fungus absolutely. In fact, ancient graffiti near some bathhouses warns about itchy bottoms and mischievous skin spirits, which is Roman code for don't sit too long or you'll need ointment. And it gets worse. Remember how the bathhouses were heated from below using hypocaust systems, basically a floor raised on pillars with furnaces underneath? Well, these warm, dark, damp spaces were prime real estate for rats and cockroaches and snakes. The occasional snake. You're suddenly hyper-aware that you've just been soaking in water, heated by what might be the rodent equivalent of a rave underneath your feet. Some bathhouses tried to manage the pest problem with cats and traps, but the reality was this: you didn't bathe alone. You shared this space with the local fauna uninvited and occasionally visible, and yet Romans just accepted it. They loved their thermi, the way modern folks love coffee shops with bad Wi-Fi, overcrowded, unpredictable, but full of character. You suspect they even bragged about their favorite bathhouses like people today name-drop their gym or yoga studio. Oh, I don't go to that one. The steam's too dry, and the oil smells like last week's eel stew. You shuffle toward the drying area, relieved to be done with water, until you see something that stops you cold. There, laid out on the stone platform, is a man applying what can only be described as sunscreen made of crocodile dung. You blink. He smiles. Egyptian recipe, he says in Latin. Good for the pores. This is real. Pliny the Elder listed it in his natural history. A mixture of dung vinegar and sometimes herbs meant to protect and exfoliate. And it's not even the weirdest ancient Roman skincare product. Mouse brains, crushed pearls, snail mucus. If you can think of it, someone rubbed it on their face. Quirkiness aside, some of these methods had surprising merit. Snail secretions do have regenerative properties, but most were closer to superstition than science. Still, in a world with no antibacterial soap, no real understanding of germs, and a bathing process that involved more people than your average concert venue, you take what you can get. You lie down on a warm stone slab, your skin now a patchwork of goosebumps, olive oil, and maybe crocodile dung by proximity. A small breeze wafts in through a high window, cutting the humidity just enough to be pleasant. You start to feel something strange peace. Even with all the chaos, the rats, the lice, the mysterious foot rash you will be Googling later. You understand why Romans loved these places. There's a rhythm to it, a culture, a camaraderie. You hear a man laughing nearby. You see an old friend surprise another with a slap on the back. A young couple whispers giggling behind a privacy screen that's doing absolutely nothing. This is Rome at its most human, vulnerable, sweaty, social. And just as you're beginning to enjoy it, someone accidentally dumps a full bucket of cold water on your back. You shriek. Everyone stares. Someone laughs. You consider becoming a hermit. You're still dripping from that unexpected cold water ambush, trying to pretend it didn't happen. The laughter fades quickly, it always does, and you shuffle forward, hugging your arms to your chest, like a defeated senator whose toga just slipped mid-speech. You need warmth. You need quiet. What you get instead is the caldarium again. Turns out Romans like to loop through their bathing routine. Multiple circuits, cold plunge, steam, scrape, repeat. It wasn't a one-and-done deal. You sigh, accept your fate, and step back into the fog. This time, the heat doesn't feel as offensive. Maybe you're adapting. Or maybe your skin's just gone numb. You slump down next to a carved lion head spout, trickling water into a shallow basin. A group of young men are arguing nearby veins, bulging arms flailing. You brace for a fight. But no, just a heated debate over olive oil prices. Welcome to Roman economics, where deals are struck mid-sweat. Bathhouses weren't just places to clean yourself or socialize, they were business hubs. Merchants sealed contracts here. Politicians whispered alliances over warm wine. And of course, lawyers flourished. Roman law required witnesses and notarization for many transactions, and nothing says binding legal agreement like swearing an oath while half naked in a room full of steam. You watch as a notary scribbles on a wax tablet with a stylus balancing it on his knee, while a client gestures wildly about grain tariffs. It's oddly efficient if you don't mind that the wax is probably melting slightly from the heat. Historians still argue whether these bathhouse business meetings were informal gossip sessions or legally binding affairs. Some records suggest actual court disputes were settled here. Others think that was just part of the hustle culture, close the deal fast before someone faints. You rise and wander toward a smaller alcove only to be intercepted by a vendor. Yes, inside the bathhouse. He's selling miracle elixirs, some thick yellowish goo in tiny clay jars. He insists it will cure joint pain, eliminate wrinkles, and make you more attractive to patricians. You ask what's in it. He grins. Secret herbs. And perhaps a little bit of eagle bile. You smile politely and back away. Another man tries to interest you in imported Gaulish soap. It smells like pine tar and wet dog. You begin to suspect this entire corridor is a marketplace cleverly disguised as a corridor, and there's always someone watching. Behind every column, someone's leaning, listening, or loitering. Bathhouses were notorious for pickpockets. Your valuables, assuming they weren't already stolen from the changing room, could vanish in a moment. The smarter bathers brought slaves specifically to guard their clothes. The less fortunate just prayed to Mercury, god of thieves, and hoped for mercy. One man bumps into you, overly friendly, clearly scouting your non-existent pockets. You glare. He winks and drifts off. You finally find a quiet nook and sit only to realize you're now directly in the line of sight of a sculpted Venus who is somehow judging you with marble eyes. You sigh and look away, only to make accidental eye contact with someone vigorously exfoliating their chest. You pretend to find the ceiling very interesting. Here in the shadows of the bathhouse, the social codes become even fuzzier. Voyeurism was not just common, it was expected. Erotic graffiti found in bathhouse walls from Pompeii to Ostia makes it clear a lot of people were here for more than a rinse. One of the weirder facts: some bathhouses hired musicians. You could be soaking in the hot pool while a flute player meandered by, or a lyre duet tried out a new love ballad in the background. Soft music, dripping water, steamy air. It all sounds relaxing until a trumpet blares 2 feet from your head. The Romans didn't consider noise a disruption. They welcomed it. To them, silence was eerie, un-Roman, even creepy. You lean your head back and listen the scrape of sandals on tile, a splash in the distance. 2 lovers whispering near the columns. A loud sneeze followed by applause. Somewhere a parrot shrieks Ave Caesar and gets a round of laughter. You close your eyes and let the chaos wash over you. Then you hear it singing, a chorus of voices, male, slightly off-key. It's a group of bathers serenading a birthday boy with a popular tavern tune about Bacchus and bees. You don't understand all the words, but the spirit is clear and very drunk. You smile despite yourself. Even here, in the middle of what amounts to a glorified puddle party, there's joy. Ridiculous, strange, slightly unhygienic joy. And then someone behind you spills hot oil on your foot. You yelp. The man apologizes profusely while mopping at your toes with what is definitely not a clean cloth. You wave him off. What's one more indignity? You've already shared bathwater with strangers, dodged pickpockets, and nearly signed up for a lifetime supply of eagle bile lotion. This is just how it goes. You're not bathing in the modern sense. You're participating in a ritual, an event. A spectacle of steam, socializing, and slippery expectations. You rise again, skin now coated in a patchwork of oil, sweat, and foot ointment, and make your way toward the far end of the bathhouse, where the ceiling arches high above you, carved with fading stars. You've heard rumors of a hidden chamber beyond, a quiet one, but that's a story for another corridor. You pass under a low archway, ducking slightly to avoid a dripping stalactite of condensed steam, and step into a narrow hallway. The noise from the main chambers fades just a little. For the first time since entering the thermoi, you can actually hear yourself breathe. The corridor opens into a dim, slightly cooler room. At first glance, it looks abandoned. But then you notice the dozen or so men and women scattered quietly throughout the space, some meditating, some napping, others simply staring into the flickering light of a nearby oil lamp. This is the Laconicum, a dry heat room, like a Roman version of a sauna, but quieter, holier even. The floor beneath you radiates warmth. The air is dry, not wet. And best of all, it doesn't smell like wet sandals and regret. For a brief moment, you consider staying here forever. Then you notice the man to your right, casually picking at his toenail with a bronze hairpin. Never mind. Even in this semi-sacred stillness, the bathhouse chaos creeps in. 2 men near the wall are whispering too softly for you to make out the words. Their body language is tense. Money changes hands, a nod, a glance toward the hallway. You've just witnessed what is either a bribe, a bet, or the beginning of a conspiracy. Either way, it's definitely not about soap. Historians still argue whether bathhouses like this were merely places of cleanliness and leisure, or deeply woven into the political undercurrents of Roman life. There's evidence of assassinations being plotted in steam rooms, favors being exchanged, secrets overheard through the fog. Even emperors weren't immune. Nero himself was rumored to use the bathhouses to eavesdrop and gently pressure rivals into retirement. You lean against a wall, close your eyes, and try to relax. The heat seeps into your bones in a way that's healing. Or maybe that's just fatigue. Your body has officially given up trying to regulate temperature. But your peace doesn't last. From the hallway, you hear a rustle, a soft scraping sound. You open your eyes just in time to see something dark and fast skitter across the floor. A rat, bold, large, possibly sentient. It pauses, looks at you, then continues on its way like it owns the place. You try to ignore it. Everyone else does. That's the unspoken rule of the Thermae ignore the rodents. They ignore you, usually. You glance at the ceiling. Mold blooms in the corners like abstract art. A slow drip lands in your hair. You sigh. And then you hear the buzzing, mosquitoes. In a bathhouse, you slap at your arm. Too slow. Another one lands on your shoulder. You're in a room designed to dry you out like fruit, and somehow the mosquitoes still thrive. You wonder if they're an ancient breed. Rome's original bloodsuckers. Despite it all, people keep arriving. A father and his young son enter and settle on a bench nearby. The boy, no more than 10, immediately strips and begins mimicking the older men, stretching, frowning thoughtfully, trying to look wise. It's adorable and a little surreal. Roman children were brought to the baths early, learning not just hygiene rituals, but the social etiquette of empire. How to speak, how to joke, how to impress, how to not sit in someone's puddle. You overhear a woman instructing her niece on the order of operations. Oil scrape, hot, cold, hot again, rest. Don't skip the cold, she warns. It wakes the soul. The girl nods solemnly, clearly terrified. Then comes the philosopher. Every bathhouse had one, the guy who shows up to monologue about virtue while half naked and oily. Today, it's a middle-aged stoic with wild eyebrows and a voice that could shatter amphorae. He paces slowly across the room, arms gesturing with dramatic flair. True freedom, he bellows, is bathing alone in one's thoughts. Everyone ignores him, except a teen in the corner who claps once sarcastically. You're beginning to realize the bathhouse isn't just a hygiene hub, it's a theater. Every chamber a stage, every bather a player. You have your poets, your philosophers, your merchants, your thieves. You even have your chorus, the background murmur of dozens of strangers navigating shared discomfort. One of the more eccentric characters walks by now, a woman wearing golden sandals and a sheer linen robe, her face smeared with purple clay. She's humming. She pauses near you, sniffs the air, and mutters, "Too much cumin in the oil today," before vanishing into the steam. You don't know whether to be impressed or concerned. The quirky part, despite the bathhouse's obvious chaos, there was an underlying sense of structure. Staff were everywhere, capsarii guarding clothes, badly balneatores managing the heat, unctores applying oil and offering massages, often unsolicited. It was a mini economy within a single building, with job titles and hierarchies, and all the drama that came with them. And then there were the unspoken social games. If you sat too long near a group of elites, you were seen as sucking up. If you avoided eye contact, you might offend. If you talked too much, you were annoying. If you stayed silent, you were suspicious. Bathing was survival. You exhale, gaze hazy head lolling against the marble wall. Your skin is dry now, probably too dry. Your limbs ache in a way that suggests either muscle relaxation or early onset rigor mortis, but you don't move. You don't want to. Despite everything, the rats, the smell, the foot scrapes, the screaming philosopher, you feel oddly at peace. And then you remember you haven't even had your massage yet. You rise slowly from the heated marble bench joints, creaking like an old door in a haunted villa. You shuffle barefoot down the corridor, skin still glowing faintly from all the oil, steam, and mosquito trauma. Your destination looms ahead, the massage chamber. You're not sure whether to be excited or afraid. At first glance, the unctuarium looks promising. Soft lighting from suspended oil lamps, piles of folded linens well folded once, and a faint smell of herbs. You step inside and are immediately greeted by a man with arms the size of amphorae. He doesn't ask your name. He just gestures toward a slab. You obey. He drizzles more oil on your back, thick, pungent, slightly gritty. You're 90% sure there's crushed rosemary in it, maybe some thyme, possibly gravel. The massage begins. And by massage, I mean he starts kneading your muscles like dough. Not gently, not with care, with the intensity of a man trying to squeeze secrets out of a sponge. You groan. He grunts. This is not relaxing. This is warfare. Roman massages weren't about pampering. They were about stimulation, circulation, and proving how much punishment your body could endure. A good massage left you sore for days. That meant it worked. Historians still argue whether these intense techniques actually promoted health, or if they were just another example of Roman excess, like flamingo tongues or gladiator fan clubs. Galen Ever, the medical micromanager, recommended massage before meals, after exercise, during illness, and possibly during philosophical debate. You wonder if he ever received one of these himself. The masseur moves to your legs. You yelp. He grins. You remind yourself that this man has probably massaged generals, senators, and centurions. He may have oiled down Marcus Aurelius himself. You do not want to appear weak. Then, without warning, he flicks your ear. Not hard. Just enough to realign your humors. You're too stunned to respond. A woman nearby giggles behind her linen wrap. You pretend you don't hear her, or see her friend clearly making a bet on whether you'll cry. You begin to zone out as the man starts humming a deep, tuneless melody that somehow makes the massage feel even more like a religious rite. You drift for a moment, floating somewhere between pain and bliss. Your mind conjures weird images, a gladiator slipping in a bath, a philosopher rubbing ointment on his donkey, a sponge on a stick growing sentient and starting a revolt. Then crack. You're suddenly very awake. That was your back. Or possibly your spirit. Better, the man asks. You nod, eyes wide. You have no idea what he just fixed or broke. But you can now hear colors. You're handed a rag that might once have been a towel. You use it to wipe the oil from your face, realizing too late that it's mostly just spreading it around. You now look like a sun-drenched gladiator after a wrestling match in a vineyard. You try to stand. Your legs wobble. You manage to walk sort of toward a corner where other freshly massaged bathers are reclining. They look equally stunned, like people emerging from a minor earthquake with a free basil sprig. And then comes the snake oil guy. He's back. This time he's pushing muscle wax of Britannia, claiming it's made from herbs, grown in soil, blessed by druids. He gestures toward your arms. Rub this on. You'll throw javelins twice as far. You shake your head. He leans in. I'll throw in an aphrodisiac for free ground viper fangs and oyster juice. You walk faster. He follows. 2 jars for 1 denarius, you disappear into the next corridor. Somehow the bathhouse has looped you again. You're back in the tepidarium, but it's different this time. Quieter. Most of the bathers have gone, leaving behind only echoes and puddles. You find a seat on a bench, still slick, still warm, and finally start to feel something like calm. You reflect as one must on the journey so far. You've been steamed, scraped, dunked, dried, oiled, slapped, kneaded, and possibly spiritually unzipped. You've encountered communal sponges, philosophical rants, and suspicious rats. And you're still here, still covered in oil. The quirky detail. Some Romans believed oil preserved youth. Cleopatra was said to bathe in donkey milk, but Roman elites swore by olive oil mixed with anything from rose petals to powdered marble. The theory was that anything slippery enough to shine bronze would also work wonders on skin. No one seemed to care about clogged pores. You hear someone snoring nearby. A soft, steady rasp. A man lies sprawled across a bench, completely unconscious, draped in a linen sheet like a burrito of exhaustion. You envy him. Someone walks by with a tray of wine cups. You take one. It's watered down, slightly sour, and exactly what you need. You sip and watch the flickering lamplight dance on the mosaics. A tiny Bacchus mid-drunken revel toasts you from the wall. You raise your cup in return. You've made it through the massage chamber. Barely. You're not sure if your muscles are relaxed or just temporarily paralyzed. But the air is cooler now. The crowds are thinning. The worst or best may be behind you. You lean back on the warm marble bench, letting the last of your tension ooze out with a slow sigh. Around you, the bathhouse has softened. The echoing voices are fewer, the laughter more distant, and the once chaotic shuffle of feet now more like a lazy trickle. You've entered the twilight of the Roman bathing experience, the frigidarium, and you're not ready. See, you've been roasted, rubbed, steamed, and essentially tenderized. Your body is a sponge full of warmth and oil. The frigidarium, as the name so cheerfully suggests, is here to shock all that out of you. Roman bathers swore by this final step, plunging into cold water, to seal the pores, invigorate the spirit, and remind you that death is always near. Probably. You eye the pool. It's large, symmetrical, and deceptively peaceful. A few brave souls are already floating silently like frozen statues. One man dunks himself, emerges gasping, and promptly declares something about real men embracing Neptune's kiss. You quietly wish Neptune would give him a timeout. Historians still debate whether this final cold plunge was truly necessary for health, or just a performance of Roman virtue, self-discipline, through voluntary suffering. Some medical texts of the time insisted the sudden chill was essential. Others warned it could trigger madness, or worse, an imbalance of moist and dry humors. You're just wondering how many times someone died of hypothermia with perfect skin. You dip a toe. Nope. But the others are watching now because of course they are, and peer pressure is a powerful Roman tradition. Gladiators faced lions for less, so you inhale, mutter a prayer to Jupiter, and jump in. The water hits like betrayal. Instant pins and needles skitter across your skin. Your lungs forget how to be lungs. Every warm cell in your body yells, "We trusted you." You sink for a second, then bob up like a startled duck, eyes wide, breath ragged. There's a strange clarity to it, though. For one surreal moment, everything is bright. Your senses sharpen. The tiles below shimmer in detailed mosaic. You count every individual goosebump on your arm. You hear a fly land 3 benches away. Time seems to stall, and you float in a cold, sacred stillness. Then you try to climb out and realize your limbs have gone on strike. 2 attendants appear. Without a word, they hoist you up, wrap you in what might generously be called a towel, and guide you to a nearby bench. It feels like being escorted from a bar after 1 drink too many, only the drink was an iceberg. Your towel is damp. Your teeth are auditioning for a percussion solo. But your skin glows. Whatever mix of punishment and pleasure the Romans perfected in these baths, it somehow works. You feel new, or maybe just numb. A man nearby sneezes so violently he nearly topples off his bench. Another clutches his chest dramatically and proclaims that cold water opens the gates to one's soul. You're not sure if he's quoting Plato or just really hates winter. One of the quirkiest details about this stage, Romans sometimes followed the cold plunge with a gentle oiling again. Yes, more oil or a sip of warm wine to reignite the internal flame. They believed that the body shocked and clean was now ready to absorb benefits, medicinal oils, wisdom, or gossip. Speaking of which, the frigidarium is quiet but not silent. In one corner, 2 older women whisper conspiratorially, heads close, gestures sharp. You pick up phrases: poisoned figs, wrong horoscope, she wore Egyptian blue before noon. High treason, clearly. In another alcove, a young man is reciting love poetry to a marble statue. The statue, to its credit, looks flattered. You wrap the towel tighter and sip a final cup of that oddly sour bathhouse wine. Your body is slowly warming again, and with it comes a surprising sense of peace. No more heat, no more scraping, just this cool blue calm. A few latecomers shuffle in, shivering in anticipation. One spots the water freezes and mutters something about reconsidering his path to virtue. You nod in solidarity. There's an eerie beauty to the frigidarium. The marble glows faintly under the oil lamps. The air hums with the low murmur of survivors. And outside you imagine the dusty streets of Rome bathed in amber light, oblivious to the trials you've just endured. You realize then that this final plunge is more than a ritual. It's a reminder that comfort is earned, that purity demands discomfort, that even the mighty Roman Empire builders of roads, slingers of catapults, worshippers of multi-headed gods knew the value of a good shock to the system. You linger a little longer, watching the ripples settle. A pigeon lands on the outer sill and watches you with judgmental eyes. You blink at it. It coos once, then flies off unimpressed. Fair. You've completed the cycle: warm, hotter, hottest, oiled, kneaded, dunked, and now chilled to the bone and strangely proud of it. As you prepare to leave the frigidarium, you spot a sponge floating near the edge. Still no stick. You shuffle out of the frigidarium, wrapped like a poorly made burrito, your damp towel trailing just enough to make every passing breeze feel personal. The exit leads you into a side corridor a little darker, a little less polished, and definitely less pleasant smelling. You've crossed into the olfactory underworld of the Roman bathhouse. Your nose twitches. Is that pickled fish, wet goat? A hint of decay with overtones of cheap perfume? The answer is yes. You've reached the zone where clean bodies and ancient plumbing collide, where Flora, Fauna, and Feces come together in a pungent ballet. No perfumed oil can disguise. The corners of the bathhouse, the areas less trafficked by the marble polishing elite, tell a different story. The smell hits you like an old toga left in a wine vat. Let's talk about latrinae. The Roman toilets were a marvel of engineering, stone benches with holes carved at regular intervals, all neatly aligned over running water. But let's not pretend they were sanitary. Waste flowed into open sewers, often backflowing when the Tiber River got moody. There was no privacy, no partitions, no modesty, just your business and your neighbors within elbow range. And remember the shared sponge on a stick, yeah. The tersorium, kept in a bucket of vinegar water used by dozens daily and handled with varying levels of enthusiasm. Historians still argue whether bathers cleaned themselves before or after using the facilities, or if some skipped the wash altogether. You just try not to breathe through your nose. You wander deeper, curious, and maybe a little reckless. A rustling in the shadows reveals a rat the size of a small loaf of bread. He pauses, makes eye contact, and scurries into a crack beneath a broken tile. A pigeon flutters past, flapping up a cloud of dust and a few unidentified mites. You try not to scream. Even the plant life has gone rogue. Vines creep along the damp walls, feeding on condensation and neglect. Mold blossoms in delicate constellations across ceiling arches. In one neglected corner, you swear you see a fig sprouting, nourished by centuries of moisture mildew and very questionable fertilizer. The bathhouse staff do what they can. Slaves splash water across the floor, sweep up debris with bundled twigs, and sprinkle crushed herbs to mask the stench. But the effort is mostly performative, like spraying cologne on a battlefield. One young boy, likely no older than 10, carries a bucket of ashes used to mop up, well, things. He dumps it into a small drain with the resignation of someone twice his age. Nearby, a slave is scrubbing a bench that looks more biological than stone. His face is vacant. His nose clearly has shut down for the season. You inch closer to the sudatorium, a lesser-used sweat room that smells like damp leather and failed ambitions. Inside, an elderly man snores gently in a corner, flanked by two skinny cats, who are either guarding him or waiting. You decide not to interrupt. The truth is, Roman baths weren't just luxury spas. They were microcosms of the city itself. And Rome, glorious as it was, never pretended to be clean. The streets overflowed with refuse urine barrels stood outside laundries. Yes, they used it to bleach clothes, and the air often carried the mingled aroma of roasted meat, fish sauce, and open drains. A fringe theory suggests that the very act of public bathing in such semi-filthy spaces was part of Rome's charm, embracing chaos, ignoring discomfort, and focusing instead on the ritual, the routine, the performance of hygiene, rather than its perfection. Historians still debate whether Romans actually believed themselves cleaner for it, or simply cleaner than the alternatives like the Gauls who preferred cold rivers and silence. You catch sight of a shadowy alcove labeled Apoditerium, the changing area. It should feel like a return to normalcy. But even here, the floor is littered with stray sandals, half-empty oil flasks, and one suspiciously still lizard. The walls are etched with centuries of graffiti, some names, some crude sketches, some weirdly poetic complaints about foot fungus. The chaos is mesmerizing. You think about that famous Roman boast, urbem lateritium invenit marmorium reliquit. He found a city of brick and left it of marble. True. But nobody ever said what was growing between those marble slabs. And yet, in this moment of grimy reflection, you spot a detail that somehow softens it all. a mother gently rinsing her toddler's hands under a dripping fountainhead. The boy giggles. She pats him dry with a linen square, careful and calm. It's oddly wholesome. You pass an elderly woman with a basket of herbs. She's selling bundles of lavender, myrtle, and thyme, not just for the scent, but as makeshift protection. Some Romans believed strong-smelling plants could ward off disease, misfortune, and even rude neighbors. She hands you a sprig of rosemary with a wink. You sniff it gratefully. Then, just as you begin to think it couldn't get any more atmospheric, a small pile of animal dung steams softly by the exit. From somewhere nearby, a donkey brays. You step over it, towel clinging to your legs, herb bundle clenched like a relic. This place is part paradise, part sewer, part fever dream, and somehow it works. It's not clean by modern standards. Heck, it's barely clean by ancient ones. But the Roman bath was never meant to be sterile. It was meant to be shared, messy, lived in. A stage where sweat water and humanity collided and no one got out without a few stains. You pat your face dry, or try to. The towel smells faintly of mildew and someone else's sandalwood. You sigh, add that to the list of sensory souvenirs, and prepare for whatever the next chamber throws at you. The next corridor curves sharply, narrowing to a bottleneck that forces you to brush shoulders with every damp stranger squeezing through. Your towel has begun to betray you, slipping just slightly, with each shuffle a quiet reminder that modesty was a luxury ancient Rome didn't always prioritize. You re-enter the heart of the bathhouse, the tepidarium again, but this time from a different wing. Something feels different now. The steam's clinging closer. The voices are louder, and the crowd is thicker. This is where the social engine of the Roman bath hits full throttle. The air buzzes not just with heat, but with business. You pass two men in soaked togas arguing about grain prices, while a third counts denarii in his palm like he's summoning spirits. In another corner, a young woman scribbles furiously on a wax tablet, trying to transcribe what sounds like a very dramatic divorce consultation. Because here's the thing most people forget: Roman baths weren't just about getting clean. They were public squares, courtrooms, beauty parlors, and marketplaces, all in a constant swirl of chatter, sweat, and scandal. Think less spa retreat and more hot tub co-working space with questionable hygiene policies. You sidestep a man slathering his chest with olive oil like he's marinating himself for dinner. His cosmete, the bathhouse equivalent of a grooming assistant, scrapes a curved strigil down his back, sending a mixture of oil, sweat, and possibly regret flying. The strigil is wiped on a rag. You wonder how often that rag gets washed. Probably not often enough. Near the fountain, a small group gathers around a man reading aloud from a scroll. It's not Cicero or Virgil. It's a particularly juicy legal complaint involving a broken amphora, 3 goats, and an affair. Everyone leans in. Bath gossip was a form of theater, and scandal loved steam. Historians still argue whether certain business deals struck in the bathhouse held legal weight, or if they were just warm promises in slippery settings. Either way, emperors to slaves made moves in these rooms. Nero was said to have listened to poetry here. Hadrian issued orders. Senators plotted. Merchants bribed. Lovers schemed. And everyone pretended the humidity wasn't making their sandals curl like overcooked flatbread. You catch sight of a modest raised platform. A group of older men is playing Alea, the Roman dice game. They slap the table with a kind of elderly glee, shouting insults in Latin, so creative they almost sound like compliments. One of them grins at you, reveals a mostly toothless smile, and mutters something about Jupiter's patience. You smile back, unsure if you've been blessed or cursed. Beside them, a bathhouse librarian, yes, some larger complexes had libraries, reorganizes scrolls behind a dripping curtain. You step closer, intrigued, but the humidity has turned half the titles into sagging spaghetti. One scroll drops, splashing into a puddle with a sound that's both sad and final. So much for the collected works of Livy. Then come the sellers. A man hawks fried dormice on a skewer, their tiny paws curled in eternal surprise. Another sells combs carved from bone. You pass a woman offering to massage your feet with imported Egyptian oil. Her price half a loaf of fresh bread or a story worth the trade. You decline politely, your feet are still recovering from the trudge across the hypocaust earlier. You pause near a wall, fresco faded but still bold with reds and golds. It shows a nymph pouring water over a bather's head. Except someone scratched a cartoonish snail next to her face. Ancient graffiti is everywhere here. Some poetic, some rude, some just odd. One carving simply reads, "I hate this place." Gaius, but Gaius is clearly in the minority. The bathhouse is thriving, and in its own slippery way, it functions. An older woman passes you nodding sagely. She's coated in a mud mask that smells of sulfur and seaweed. A teenage boy follows, carrying her sandals like sacred relics. Behind them, two philosophers argue quietly, seriously, about the soul's weight in relation to steam. You keep walking. That's not a debate you're qualified to enter without caffeine. At one point, you spot a man carving a tiny Venus figurine from soapstone, his fingers fast and precise. "For the gods," he says when you linger. Or maybe just for the tourists. He winks. You don't ask for clarification. There's laughter now, deep belly laughter coming from the Laconicum. A joke you missed maybe, or just the relief of heat giving way to comfort. The laughter blends into the splash of water, the scrape of strigils, the clatter of sandals on tile. It's loud, alive, full of contradiction. You begin to realize the bathhouse is less about cleanliness and more about cleansing. A ritual, yes, but one that sweats out more than grime. Worries, secrets, ambitions, regret. And while the hygiene may be debatable, the human need for these spaces isn't. They're chaotic, imperfect, wonderfully communal. A sweaty metaphor for Rome itself. Just as you reach the next archway, a boy races past and slips, landing hard on his back. The room gasps, then chuckles. He's fine, laughing even. Someone tosses him a fig. Life rolls on. You pat your arms dry. Your skin's soft. Your ears are ringing slightly from the volume. But beneath it all, you feel strangely refreshed, connected, almost Roman. You glance once more at the fresco wall, half wondering if Gaius ever came around to liking this place. Maybe he just needed a better foot massage. You shuffle forward into what seems at first a quieter annex of the complex. But the hush is deceiving. It's the sudatorium, and the silence comes not from tranquility, but from the collective effort of everyone inside to simply breathe. The sudatorium is the Roman answer to a modern steam sauna, but with a touch more drama. The air is thick, wet, and heavy, as if you're breathing through a wool blanket. The walls glisten with condensation like polished onyx, and every surface threatens to roast your fingertips if you dare touch it for longer than a blink. You sit down slowly, careful not to scald your thighs on the stone bench. This is no place for modesty or extra fabric. Those who linger too long wrapped in cloth risk leaving with third-degree regrets. Your towel, traitorous as ever, has given up entirely. You let it. A trickle of sweat begins at your temples almost instantly. Within seconds, you're drenched. Your pores open like panicked mouths, and the body you've been dragging through grime soot and social intrigue begins to liquefy. Still you stay, because Romans believed sweating was holy, not metaphorically, like actually divine. The sudatorium was not only a place for purification, but a kind of temple to the body's humors. Health was about balance, after all. And what better way to banish bad bile or wayward black phlegm than to boil it out like soup stock? Historians still argue whether the Roman obsession with sweating had medical merit, or was more placebo than panacea. Ancient physicians like Galen championed it. Modern experts tend to raise an eyebrow. But even now, you can't deny something cathartic about stewing in your own fatigue until your worries melt off like butter on bronze. The room is small, intentionally so. Heat must be trapped. A crew of slaves stokes the fires beneath your feet, maintaining a furnace worthy of Vulcan himself. Through a small hatch in the floor, you glimpse glowing embers and hear the dull roar of flame. You give silent thanks you're up here, not down there. A fellow bather leans over and whispers, "You know the Emperor Caracalla's bathhouse had a sudatorium twice this size. Marble floors, gilded ceilings, perfumed steam." Then he coughs like a dying goat. But it also collapsed and killed 17 people. You smile not because it's funny, but because you're a little dizzy and everything is funny now. To your left, someone has passed out gracefully, face first, against the wall. Drool steaming before it hits the tile. No one panics. It's part of the experience. A servant tiptoes in to place a damp cloth over the sleeper's neck, then tiptoes out. Efficiency, compassion, rehearsed nonchalance. A man near the door slaps his chest and shouts something about his lungs being reborn. Another claims he's having visions. A third quietly mutters that he's about to faint, but refuses to leave because he paid for the full soak. You watch beads of water trail down the curved walls. Some pools form tiny rivers at the corners. You imagine that if you stayed here long enough, you might evaporate entirely, leave behind only a faint watermark and a forgotten sandal. Then there's the issue of the oils. You remember the strigil sessions earlier, where men scraped themselves clean with curved blades after slathering their skin in olive oil and mystery herbs. What you didn't realize then is that much of that oily runoff ends up here in the steam, cycling through tile grooves and into shallow basins. A communal broth of exfoliation. Some bathers use it again, others pretend not to notice. You shift uncomfortably. Your seat is slick. One particularly sunburnt man dips his fingers into the basin and massages the gunk into his beard. He claims it cures lice. You move a little further down the bench. Despite it all, the heat, the sweat, the threat of someone else's toe touching yours, you begin to understand the appeal. The steam doesn't just cleanse the skin, it scrubs the ego. There's no rank in this room. Senators and slaves alike pant under the same furnace. No toga to flash status. No scrolls to show off literacy. Just humans leaking dignity at an equal rate. And when someone finally groans and stumbles out into the corridor like a phoenix reborn, clutching their towel like it's a life raft, you feel a strange envy. That's the kind of catharsis you came for. You decide it's time. Rising is harder than expected. Your joints protest. Your fingers prune, but you move slowly toward the door. As you push through the heavy curtain, a sudden breeze brushes your skin, and for a brief moment, you feel celestial. You've survived the sudatorium, barely. The hallway outside is lined with tiny niches in the wall places to rest. Breathe sip from a cold amphora. You collapse into one heart thumping like gladiator drums. Your lungs expand. The air tastes like clay and eucalyptus. A nearby boy offers you a sliver of honeycomb. You nod and accept. The sweetness is overwhelming, like your taste buds are waking up after a long sleep. Nearby, a singer begins to hum. Low, slow notes. A tune from the countryside, maybe. The melody twines with the rhythm of water trickling from a cracked jug. No one speaks. Even Rome, it seems, knows when to hush. You stagger forward, dripping dazed, and maybe just a little delirious toward the cold plunge. And you know, because someone whispered it into your ear as you passed, that this is the part that separates the casual bathers from the true believers. The frigidarium awaits. It's a vast room, domed like the heavens, with columns that rise like tree trunks into a painted sky. Everything about this space is calculated for contrast. Bright mosaic tiles in icy blues and sea greens floors chilled to the touch, and an open circular pool that looks almost inviting until you remember what's in it. Cold, bone-hugging, nail-stinging cold. You approach the edge and dip a toe in. Instantly regret it. Your brain pulls the fire alarm. That's not water, it's punishment. It's liquid revenge for every second you spent basking in the sudatorium like a sweaty pastry. But you came this far, and besides, you've got an audience. 2 women are already neck-deep in the center of the pool, trading scandalous gossip about a certain senator's unusual birthmark. A teenage boy does a swan dive off the side and emerges screaming but triumphant. A withered man in his 80s swims smooth laps muttering to himself about the Punic Wars. You take the plunge. The cold hits like betrayal. You gasp, no gargle, and feel every nerve ending in your body shrink into your spine. Your heart forgets how to beat. Your lungs become tiny stone statues. You want to scream, but your face is too frozen to form vowels. This is what the Romans called therapeutic. Historians still argue whether the cold plunge served a true medical function or was just a glorified dare. Some ancient texts praise it for invigorating the soul and sealing the skin's pores. Others suggest it helped prevent infections after the more communal aspects of bathing. Still others think it was purely symbolic cleansing, not just of grime, but of pride. A few scholars note that emperors like Hadrian insisted on daily plunges, believing it kept them youthful and alert. Meanwhile, others point out that hypothermia existed back then too, and maybe Hadrian was just being dramatic. Either way, you're in now, and oddly, after the first 2 minutes of primal panic, your body adjusts. Not to comfort, let's not pretend, but to acceptance. Your heart slows, your skin numbs. The cold becomes not an enemy, but a stern friend holding you accountable for your decisions. You float on your back, watching torchlight flicker across the domed ceiling. Painted cherubs chase each other across a faded fresco. The smell of mint, of clay, of something faintly metallic fills the air. A breeze sneaks through a high window and strokes your face with the gentlest slap imaginable. Suddenly you realize something: you're clean. Like truly, epically clean. Inside and out. Your pores are tighter than a miser's purse. Your thoughts feel rinsed, reset. Even your inner monologue has lowered its voice to a soothing whisper. You haven't felt this aware of your own body in days, maybe ever. That's not to say things are perfect. There's still a questionable yellow foam bobbing near the edge of the pool. Someone may or may not have just peed. The smell of fish sauce lingers faintly in your nose, thanks to the nearby massage stall, offering a very specific type of exfoliation. But in this moment, in this chill, all of it feels part of a greater ritual. You haul yourself out like a waterlogged scroll, limbs, shaky teeth humming Morse code. A towel is offered warm this time. Someone hands you a cup of watered wine, which you sip like it's nectar from Olympus. Your head swims, but pleasantly. Nearby, a man is lecturing a small group about Hippocrates and the 4 bodily humors, using a wax fig as a diagram. You watch transfixed as he explains how too much yellow bile leads to anger and how the cold plunge resets the fire within. Someone interrupts, unless of course the fire needs to burn. The two fall into friendly argument. You drift past them, drying your ears with the corner of your towel, wondering which of your own humors just took a holiday. You make your way to a quieter side alcove, where a statue of Venus watches over a reflective pool. It's said this is where bathers come to offer a final prayer or an apology to the goddess of beauty for what they're about to smell like after leaving the building. Because the irony of Roman bathing is this: despite all the soaking, steaming, and scraping, most people walk out still slightly off. Sure, you're cleaner, but the mingling of oils, perfumes, and bodily contributions means your aroma now contains hints of pine resin sweat, ancient mildew, and citrus if you're lucky. And yet you feel powerful. You've endured the caldarium, the scrape of a stranger's strigil, the ghost of gladiator foot fungus, the collective sigh of 10 overheated senators, and the freezing embrace of the frigidarium. You've bathed Roman style and survived. You look down at your fingers, pruned like raisins. Your reflection stares back from a polished bronze dish, tired, flushed, slightly feral. You grin. The ordeal is almost over. Almost. You've survived the fire and ice of Roman bathing, and now with pruned fingers and a barely there towel clinging to your dignity, you shuffle onward toward the finishing line, the unctorium. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of a beauty salon meets body shop. Here's where your tired, traumatized self gets slathered, massaged, buffed, and possibly slapped into radiance. The moment you step in, the smells hit you hard. Frankincense, rosemary, myrrh, and olive oil infused with every herb imaginable. It's like walking nose first into an apothecary's dream, or a sneeze waiting to happen. Before you can protest an attendant with forearms carved from marble gestures for you to lie down. You obey. You're past shame now. At this point, if they asked to roll you in breadcrumbs and roast you on a spit, you'd nod wearily and say, "Just make it quick." The massage begins. It's not gentle. This isn't the romantic harp music kind of massage you'd find in a spa. No, this is therapy disguised as violence. The oil is warm, thank the gods, and smells faintly of lavender and pepper. But the hands applying it belong to someone who once strangled boars for sport. You wince. You hiss. You make little dolphin sounds as pressure is applied to muscles you didn't know existed. A mainstream fact here: Romans were obsessive about oil. They didn't use soap. Instead, they'd bathe oil up and then scrape the gunk off using curved metal tools called strigils. Yes, that same strigil again, possibly the same one used by the man who went before you. Don't ask. Don't think. Once oiled, you're scraped again, but this time more gently. The strigil makes swooshing sounds against your skin, carving paths of shine across your arms and legs. A servant collects the residue in a shallow dish, muttering something about recycling for perfume. You hope he's joking. he's not. Here's a quirky tidbit for your queasy little heart. Certain Roman athletes would sell their scraped sweat and oil mixture called gladiator unguent as an aphrodisiac or miracle tonic. Fans would pay a lot to rub it on themselves. Imagine shelling out your life savings for second-hand armpit grease. Different times. Your attendant now begins the final rub-down with powder. Yes, powder made of chalk, crushed rose petals, and something suspiciously gritty. It clings to the remaining oil and gives your skin a glow that screams, recently exfoliated, but also may flake at any moment. The goal isn't cleanliness now, it's presentation. The Romans believed in leaving the bath looking better than when you entered. Not just refreshed, but reassembled. A small boy brings you a mirror, and you barely recognize the glowing, stunned creature staring back. Your hair's been combed with a bone pick. Your shoulders gleam like polished bronze. Your skin smells of basil and judgment. You're a walking appetizer. And just when you think the ordeal is done, nope. Time for the social gauntlet. See, the unctorium isn't just for rubbing you down. It's where everyone lingers, gossiping, flirting, politicking. You edge into a corner hoping to avoid eye contact, but a senator in training in a too-short tunic starts chatting your ear off about Caesar's latest grain tax. Two women argue over whose bathhouse had better acoustics for poetry readings. Someone loudly recounts a dream where Neptune personally recommended his favorite oil blend. You're trapped in a post-bath salon surrounded by gleaming, opinionated Romans who won't stop talking. And here's the kicker: historians still argue whether this final phase, the lounging, oiling, gossiping, was the real point of the whole thing. Maybe the baths were just elaborate excuses for elite networking. Maybe cleanliness was secondary to status. Or maybe the Romans just really liked being half naked together. Whatever the truth, one thing's clear: your bath was never just about hygiene. It was about endurance, about submission to routine, about identity politics and the performance of purity. You gather your robes still damp from the heat and wrap yourself with shaky dignity. Someone compliments your glow. You nod like it was easy, like you weren't moments ago whimpering into a sponge. Outside, the sun is lower now, slanting golden across the dusty cobblestones. You pass a vendor selling roasted nuts, their scent mixing with the basil still clinging to your skin. You hear a child laugh. A dog barks. The city hums with evening energy. And you walk taller. Not cleaner, let's be honest, but altered. Baptized by steam and scraped by strangers. You made it through the unctorium, and you survived. You shuffle homeward sore and gleaming, imagining this ordeal is over. But no Rome has one final trick up its sleeve, and it's flowing right through your pipes. Literally. See, for all their engineering genius, the Romans had a slight oversight when it came to their legendary plumbing system. They used lead. Yes, lead. The aqueducts, those magnificent arches stretching across the countryside, funneled water straight into the city using lead pipes. That water powered fountains, flushed latrines, and yes, filled your beloved bathhouse. You pause to sip from a public spout. It tastes metallic. But hey, everyone else is drinking it right. Now here's your mainstream historical fact. The Romans were among the first to implement a city-wide water supply system. They built over 11 major aqueducts that could deliver hundreds of millions of gallons daily to baths, homes, and gardens. Impressive stuff. But then comes the fringe detail, the one that makes your eyebrow twitch. Some scholars believe this abundant lead exposure helped slowly poison Rome. Not enough to kill people outright, but enough to cause long-term health issues. Memory loss, infertility. Mood swings, possibly even contributing to the erratic behavior of emperors like Caligula or Nero. Historians still argue whether lead poisoning had any real impact on the empire's decline. Some say it's exaggerated. Others think it's exactly the kind of silent disaster that unravels a civilization from within. Back in your apartment, if you're lucky enough to have private plumbing, you twist a bronze valve and watch brown-tinged water dribble out. It's lukewarm despite your best efforts. The smell faintly swampy. That's probably just sulfur from the pipes. Or is it? You catch your reflection in a polished plate. Your skin's glowing from the oils, but your eyes are tired and itchy. Could just be the herbs. Could also be that bath water full of other people's sweat hair and flaked off skin. Remember that you suppress a shiver. Then there are the outbreaks. See, while Romans swore by daily bathing for health, reality didn't always agree. Communal water equals communal germs. It turns out dipping into a shared vat of body fluids isn't great for infection control. The Roman physician Galen himself noted how skin diseases, eye infections, and other mysterious ailments spread rapidly among bathgoers. You wonder how many people thought they were getting healthier while marinating in the exact opposite. A neighbor down the hall mentions his son came back from the baths with the itch. You don't ask for details. You've learned better. And here's the weird twist. Despite all this, Roman doctors kept pushing the baths as cures for everything. Headaches, bath. Cough, steam it out. Digestive troubles. Jump in the frigidarium and hold your breath. Some even believed the right combination of oil scraping and sulfur water could fix your personality. You were expected to emerge not just clean, but better. The contradictions pile up like wet towels. Public health hazard or daily necessity. Relaxation or exposure. Medicine or masquerade. Truth is, Rome was a city of contradictions. It gave you poetry and poison in the same cup. Its bathhouses were no exception, part temple, part trap. You came for cleansing and left with a rash, some gossip, and possibly early onset madness. Worth it, but you do it anyway, because in Rome, skipping the bath meant more than skipping a rinse. It meant social exclusion. It meant suspicion. Why isn't he at the baths, people would whisper. What's he hiding, or worse, is he poor? So you keep going. Tomorrow you'll oil up again. You'll scrape. You'll soak in water shared by hundreds. You'll dodge parasites and pray the heat doesn't take you out. You'll nod politely at the senator with foot fungus and pretend you don't see the strigile that still has someone else's hair stuck to it. Because that's Rome. Beneath the marble and mosaics, it's gritty, loud, questionable, but somehow irresistible. And even though you know the pipes might be killing you slowly, and the oils might be rubbing in more than they're scrubbing off, and the water might be half compost, you'll go. Because not going is worse. Because being clean here isn't about water. It's about belonging. The days pass. The baths remain. You walk the familiar path again, sandals scuffing dust into golden shafts of light. The sounds are the same slap of wet feet on marble, clatter of bronze tools, groans from the caldarium. The steam hugs your skin before you're even inside. But this time something feels off. The crowd is thinner. Murmurs travel faster, echoing through spaces once packed with laughter and intrigue. You notice more cracks in the tile work, a sluggish drip from a once proud lion-headed spout. The furnace behind the hypocaust has gone cold in one corner. The flamekeeper hasn't shown up. again. Rome is changing and the bathhouses with it. You settle onto a worn bench in the tepidarium. The walls are still painted with gods and myths, but the paint is peeling just a little. In the corner, a once elegant woman complains about barbarians and tax hikes. A boy runs by with no sandals and no supervision, giggling as he slaps into the frigidarium's icy pool. His laughter echoes and then vanishes into quiet. Your strigil has a nick in it. You don't remember that being there before. Here's the hard truth: the golden age of the Roman baths doesn't last. As the empire falters, so does its water. Aqueducts fall into disrepair. Slaves flee. Taxes soar. The rich build private bathhouses in their villas. The poor go without. By the 5th century, whole neighborhoods are left with nothing but stagnant basins and echoing ruins. Historians still argue whether the fall of Rome's baths signaled the fall of its spirit. Some claim the decline of communal bathing shows a deeper erosion of civic unity, of hygiene, of identity. Others say the baths were a luxury, not a lifeline, and that Rome's collapse was already sealed by economics, war, and bad emperors. You stand up slowly. A man coughs in the corner. It's the wet kind. No one moves to help. Even now, centuries later, bathhouses still linger in collective memory. From Turkish hammams to Finnish saunas, the idea of ritual bathing survives. The Romans didn't invent washing, but they made it an institution, a spectacle, a statement. For a while it worked. But now the heater runs cold. The pools smell of mildew, and goats graze where senators once debated taxes in togas. The ruin begins not with fire or sword, but with silence. No laughter, no hissing steam. Just the soft crumble of plaster and the whisper of bathwater draining for the last time. You look around one final time. The baths were never just about being clean. They were about being Roman. And as you walk out into the open air, past ivy-covered columns and dry fountains, you realize they still are. Word count 038. Wind down 300 words. The baths fade behind you now, just shadows in memory. As you walk through the crumbling alleys of ancient Rome, your sandals barely scuff the stones. The noise dwindles. The steam lifts. That strange cocktail of sweat, oil, and mystery lingers only faintly, like the echo of a dream you can't quite recall. Your skin is warm, your limbs soft and heavy, like they've soaked in something deeper than water. Time, maybe. Or history itself. And even though the walls are cracking, and the marble is chipped, and the baths you knew are slipping into ruin, there's something soothing about their silence now. The chaos has quieted. The rush is over. And even if the next bath is years away, centuries even, you've felt it. You've lived it. You were there when the oil was hot, and the rumors hotter. You walked barefoot across slippery floors and flinched at every tickle of questionable foam. You endured the stink, the stares, the strigils, the lead pipes, and the goat invaders. And you came out, maybe not cleaner, but wiser, softer, sleepier. So now let it all settle. Sink into your sheets like a cool frigidarium. Let your breathing slow like a dying furnace. And let those marble arches crumble gently in your mind. You're safe now. You've left the baths behind. Sleep well, little Roman. End of script. Sweet dreams.